What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and you guys have been asking me to cover Time Eater Kang, who's just a ridiculously overpowered version of Kang the Conqueror, one of the many variants that exist out there. So this takes place in the first story arc called Test of Time from Exiles Volume 3, and it's the only good story out of the whole run of Exiles Volume 3. But this initially opens up with a guy called the Unseen, who's met by a younger version of Nick Fury. We'll explain who the Unseen is later on in this video because it will become kind of important. He is an interesting character, but not overly important. What is important here is this younger version of Nick Fury shows up here with the Talus. Now, the Talus is an artifact that does have a great big huge lengthy history. The Time Broker, the Time Breakers, the Crystal Palace, all that kind of stuff. The long and short of it, and to really kind of keep this video on track, the Talus is a device that allows those who have it in their possession to jump between realities. But the kicker about this is to travel from one universe to another is to travel through both time and space. So you could leave the main Marvel universe at 6 p.m. on a Wednesday, and when you jump to another reality, it's like 8 a.m. on a Saturday, because time does not pass the same in every single universe, because different universes came into existence at different points in time. But with the arrival of the Talus back in the main Marvel universe and it arriving on the moon, it immediately contacts Blink. And the reason why is because Blink was one of the original members of the Exiles. So she very much has a close and tight connection with the Talus. And so when she gets to the moon and she comes across the Unseen, who she's never met before, he's super cryptic in his responses, right? Like when she asks, "Who are you?" He's like, "I have had names, but now I am no one. Now I am only an I. Call me the Unseen." And he just keeps on babbling on, and she's like, "Yeah, cool, whatever, man. So like, what am I doing here, right? Why is the Talus here?" And while the Unseen seems to indicate that it has some understanding of the Talus, which it does due to the fact that the Talus is multiversal and the Unseen sees everything across the multiverse, its response is, "I did not summon you here. The Talus summoned you here of its own volition." Then it immediately bonds to Blink and it yanks her into a different universe. Now, one of the things you guys are going to notice about this is that unlike the original Exiles comics, we're not really getting like numerical designations for these different realities that the Exiles are jumping in and out of. That was kind of an important aspect of the old school Exiles comics, but it's not like World Tour where they go and visit like 2099 and Future Imperfect and these different alternate realities there. But what is going on, just by context of what we're seeing, is that this universe is very similar to Days of Future Past. And most all of you guys are aware of what Days of Future Past is on some level, so we don't have to go super in-depth into it. The long and short is that it's just a future in any one particular universe where everything just went sideways, right? Superheroes were either captured or destroyed or a combination of both. Sentinels took over North America. In some realities, the Sentinels took over the world. But ever since the original Days of Future Past, that kind of story has been popular. I love it, right? Death, destruction, and mayhem. I'm like, yeah, give me more of that. But it's just one of these things where stuff has gone sideways incredibly fast. Blink is overpowered relatively quickly. Then she's brought to an older version of Kamala Khan, who basically never became a mutant, seemingly never joined the X-Men. She's been an Inhuman this entire time. Now, I say that because at the time this story was written, the Marvel Cinematic Universe had not introduced Kamala Khan to the MCU, and they had not made her a mutant, so they didn't really force Marvel Comics to do that as well. She's just an Inhuman that's out there. But the long and short of this is that she just kind of sees herself as an enemy of like Sentinels and so on, and the world has broken down in such a way to where it's just like warlords and petty strongmen who are just kind of ruling different sections of whatever territory they happen to occupy. She happens to occupy New Jersey because that's where her character is based out of. But of course, because of the fact that she is Inhuman, and because of the fact that she can basically use her abilities in terms of grabbing people, detecting their heart rates and so on and so forth, and being able to figure out whether or not they're lying, when she asked the question of Blink, "Why are you here?" and Blink's response is, "I have no idea why I'm here. All I know is that this talisman just yanked me from my dimension into this alternate dimension." Kamala Khan realizes she's telling the truth. But before anybody can get any other questions, the entirety of the universe is just wiped away. Like literally just annihilated like that, right? It's just gone. And it's like, okay, so like, this is nuts. But the talisman whisks both Blink and Kamala away to what is potentially and most likely a different reality, where you have Iron Lad, who isn't really a superhero, but he's a guy who's basically taking out his bullies. Now, for those of you guys who don't know who Iron Lad is, it gets explained perfectly, because what he says is, yes, like Kang the Conqueror is me, or I'm him, however you want to look at it. And so what he says is like, I'm Kang the Conqueror when Kang the Conqueror was a teenager, and Kang from the future came into the past to rescue me from some bullies. And the hope was that he could start me on the path of becoming him, so it would make it easier for him to conquer all things in existence. That origin right there is the origin of Iron Lad in every single depiction of his character that matters in Marvel Comics. This is an alternate reality version of the character, but in the main Marvel universe, it's the exact same thing. The only difference here is that this Iron Lad just chose to get revenge on his bullies. In the main Marvel universe, Iron Lad joined the Young Avengers and became a superhero. But that origin is universal, right? For those of you guys who aren't familiar with that, Iron Lad is a teenage version of Kang who decided he didn't want to become Kang, although he inevitably will become Kang. Kang the Conqueror is Kang the Conqueror, right? The guy from the 31st century who's always going into the past and trying to conquer everything and failing. And Immortus is the guy that Kang will become, right? Kang the Conqueror, Immortus, and Iron Lad explained in 15 seconds. So the thing about this is that, of course, Kang in this universe shows up and starts attacking everybody, only for him to be wiped out in like an instant. And then we end up coming face to face with the Time Eater, which is just like this giant head of Galactus that just rolls in here and just starts consuming the entirety of time in this universe. Now, this is not Galactus. Just FYI, right? This is not Galactus, but Galactus is associated with what's going on here. Now, of course, Iron Lad and then Blink and Kamala are yanked out by the Talus just in time to keep their entire existence from being eradicated. Then they end up arriving in another universe where Surtur is launching some attack against like Asgard, and Valkyrie shows up to rescue the day, which is dope because Valkyrie never gets enough respect in Marvel Comics. And I'm glad to see that it's finally happening, right? Whether it's Brunhild, right? Or whether it's this Valkyrie, it doesn't matter. Valkyrie as a character is dope, especially in the old school Defenders comics. You guys remember that, man? The OG Defenders? I know most of you guys don't. Most of you guys are too young, but the OG Defenders with Valkyrie were dope. In any event, Blink and Kamala and them showing up here basically kind of helped to turn the tide of the battle. Surtur's defeated. He just runs away, babbling some stuff about how you haven't heard the last of him and so on and so forth. But much like what we've seen so far, before anybody can get to know anybody else, suddenly everything is wiped out again, right? Like the Time Eater shows up and consumes everything yet again. And so as you can probably tell, a team is basically coming into formation here. And that's usually how it works when it comes to the Exiles. For example, like the next universe they show up to is more or less like a cartoon style universe, Xavier's Playtime Fun School for Gifted Youngsters, which kind of sounds horrifying, to be honest with you guys. You've got Wolverine here, who's basically this reality's version of like Spider-Ham, right? Very much just kind of like a cartoon type character. But again, as we've seen before, the entirety of the universe is completely and totally obliterated, save for this little cartoon version of Wolverine, who they call Wolvie, who's basically brought along on the team as well. And so with this team assembled, they arrive back on the moon and they're met with the Unseen. Now, here's the thing about the Unseen, because when this is happening, he's being put on trial by the Watchers, right? Back away from this comic book for a second. Let's talk about a storyline in Marvel Comics called Original Sin. So as most of you guys know, the Watcher exists in Marvel Comics as a guy that sees everything. The way that this was explained in Marvel is that everything the Watcher sees is stored in the Watcher's eyes. And that in effect, the Watcher had seen something he wasn't supposed to see. And where initially the story was a mystery, we ended up learning Nick Fury killed him. The old school, like white guy Nick Fury, he killed the Watcher. In response for this, once the rest of the Watchers had learned what he'd done, they basically imprisoned him on the moon to replace the Watcher, and he was called the Unseen. That by and large, no one really knows he's there, right? Even people who show up won't necessarily see him all the time. And whether or not he is seen by any one particular person is quite literally based on the plot. I'm not even lying to you, right? Like there's been instances of characters showing up and they just never see him, right? He's just there and they just never really acknowledge his existence. But that's kind of his curse, right? And so that's why him intervening and then basically speaking to the younger version of himself who came through that portal with the Talus at the beginning of all of this he's being put on trial by the Watchers because Watchers are not supposed to intervene. With Uatu the Watcher, it was a special case because it's Uatu the Watcher and he's awesome, right? Who's going to tell that guy no? But as far as the Unseen goes, he doesn't hold that level of clout. The kicker about all this is that because of what's going on, the Watchers intend to pass judgment, which means killing the Unseen. Wolvie goes to jump in the way, Blink teleports, jumps in the way, knocks Wolvie out, and then the blast from the Watchers hits the talisman. And because it cracks, it just sends everybody all over the place, right? They all kind of get scattered to these different locations, literally just yanked through the time stream arbitrarily. They don't know where they're going. They don't know how they're teleporting from one place to the next, how it's being done. Nothing that you really see here in terms of them jumping from one universe to the next is overly important. I will say one of the things that happens that's really cool here is they're actually teleported to a reality where Peggy Carter becomes Captain America. This was published in 2008. Technically, this character is based on the introduction of Peggy Carter as Captain America from Marvel Puzzle Quest, but it predates the What If story, right? So for those of you guys who believed that the Marvel What If cartoon was like the first canon appearance of Peggy Carter becoming Captain America, that's not true. And this one is actually a lot cooler. They do help her basically defeat the Red Skull, but again, the Talus is just kind of yanking them through from one reality to the next. So it's not really designed to bolster the roster of the team anymore. It's really just kind of designed to have them just yanking through different dimensions and for us to see different universal possibilities, but like none of it's overly important and none of it's really cool, to be honest with you guys. But eventually what ends up happening here is they arrive back on the moon to find that these Watchers have all basically been eradicated and a giant helmet of Galactus is just kind of sitting out there. More so than that, what Iron Lad figures out is he says, I found records, right? He says, I'm finally piecing this whole thing together. The man who killed these Watchers also killed Galactus, some world's version of Galactus, and then harnessed his power. He's stolen Galactus's power a bunch of times, maybe thousands of times, and he somehow turned it into power to consume whole realities. The man who tried to kill us when we first met, the man who will consume the last reality if we don't stop him. And that's when everybody realizes, one, this is the final reality in the entirety of the multiverse. Every other universe has been consumed, and the person doing this is some variant of Kang the Conqueror who killed his own universe's version of Galactus, stole his power cosmic, and then jumped to another reality, did the exact same thing. And by amplifying his power several times over, it's made him powerful enough to travel through the entirety of the multiverse and start consuming whole universes, wiping them all out. Now, in terms of what his motivation is, honestly, Marvel's just kind of pointing to the idea that like he's just a bad guy doing bad guy stuff. And for those of you guys who are going to ask the question, where's like the living tribunal in the midst of all of this? This is one of those stories that Marvel creates where there's some multiversal threat out there and they just don't intervene with the living tribunal. Because the reality here is it would end the story in an instant. There would be no story here. The living tribunal would just show up and just be like, I judge against you, Kang, strip him of all of his power, set everything back to the way it's supposed to be, game over, right? You wouldn't be able to tell this story if you invoked the living tribunal. So that's why he's not here. And most likely and possibly even dead, not 100% sure. But when the group goes to attack Time Eater Kang, nothing they do works here, nor would you expect it to, right? Because in reality, they're just not powerful enough to be able to defeat this guy, even when younger Nick Fury shows up. Now, this is when the paradoxes start kicking in, because the younger Nick Fury that we see here, this is before he showed up on the moon and met the Unseen at the beginning of this story. It's one of those cyclical things where it's almost kind of a time loop to a degree. And so as they're jumping through, they teleport to the only place they can, which is just away from that version of Time Eater Kang, but it's still in this particular universe and it's still in the castle of Kang because there's nothing left. There's nowhere to teleport to. That is one of the benefits of Blink when she was on the Exiles. Instead of just teleporting from one geographic location to the next on Earth or in the universe, she could teleport between realities. So that really amped and really amplified the abilities of her character. Now, this is where things also get a little bit murky because Marvel doesn't really give us a hard answer here, which is to say, if we're going to defeat this Time Eater Kang and we're going to set everything back to rights, and this is all kind of like a time loop, how do we break the loop? We don't really get a hard answer here. Instead, it's all just kind of speculating. Nobody really knows for sure. And a lot of that's because with this particular Exiles team, they don't really fully understand what's going on. Now, that was one of the benefits of the Exiles comics, and it's one of the reasons why I love the Exile comics back in the day. It wasn't like your traditional Avengers story where it was like, "Hearken alas, Kang the Conqueror has traveled from the future to attack us. Pray tell your motivations, Kang the Conqueror," right? It's like, "I'm here because I'm Kang and I just want to ensnare and enslave the entirety of the earth. Okay, get him." And then like Kang's defeated, he flees back to the future, roll credits. It wasn't like that with the Exiles. In a lot of instances, the Exiles would just be thrown into some situation and they would have no clue what in the world was going on, but they would have to kind of like figure out some method of finding a way to win. And they were flying by the seat of their pants 90% of the time. It was amazing. I loved the old Exiles comics. They were just so great. And so that's why Iron Lad speaks up here and he says, "Unless I'm exceedingly way off, your meeting with the unseen at the start of all of this was basically one of these like tipping points." And he says, "I think if we can get the Talus back to when you first touched this new manifestation of it, it might reverse Kang's consumption of the multiverse." Is there any evidence to point to the fact that this might work? Not really. No one knows if it will. They could literally just like find some way to use the Talus to jump back into the past and then go back to the very moment when all this kicked off and nothing changes, right? Like everything just continues on the way that it always did. So there's no hard and fast answers here. That kind of mindset when it came to Exile stories is the reason why I always said, either you love the Exiles or you hate the Exiles. There is no in between. There's no middle ground when it came to that comic. And so in the midst of them kind of pondering all of this and asking this question, they're suddenly set upon by the return of Time Eater Kang, who's looking to destroy them all. Now, one of the cool things that's asked here is, why doesn't he just kill us? Right? Like if this guy's so astronomically powerful, why doesn't he just eradicate us all on the spot and call it a day? And what's theorized here, which I would argue is probably the most logical situation because we're not really given any meaningful explanation into the mindset of Time Eater Kang, but it's simply just, as we know Kang as a character, this guy loves the idea of taking his time and just kind of surgically conquering universes. And so if this guy really is just a version of Kang, which he is, he would take his time in surgically consuming universes. So wiping out the last remnants of the universe and enjoying the process of destroying everything, he would savor all of this, right? It's like being served a fantastic steak. You're not gonna like woof the whole thing down. You're gonna savor it, right? You're gonna be like, yes, this 16-ounce ribeye, crusted on the outside, tender on the inside, because I'm a rational human being and I don't do medium or medium well, or God forbid, well done, right? Like, it's one of those things where he's just kind of savoring it all, right? Which, by the way, I don't mind if you eat your steaks, you know, as medium well done, right? We can't all be winners. So the thing about this is that as they're jumping through, right, they actually end up coming across Sabretooth, who's kind of just been long lost in the Exiles comics. Now, he does have a whole history there. To keep this video on track, we're not going to go overly into it. If you guys are interested in me covering the Exiles, let me know, because the original comics were great. They weren't that dissimilar from this, but they really were awesome, and they were certainly a lot more organized than this story is. But as they're jumping through, and even when they get to where Sabretooth is at in this alternate reality where everything's frozen over, this just giant head of Kang the Conqueror emerges with all these Kangs multiplying like rabbits, jumping out, right? Like literally just jumping out and attacking all of them. So like they're fighting this army of Kangs, but they have to buy time. And so Kamala Khan ends up activating this self-destruct device and blows up seemingly all of them, buying enough time for Blink, Sabretooth, and Nick Fury to jump through the portal. Now, when that happens, they end up just kind of arriving in different locations, right? Traveling to different destinations, but Nick Fury himself travels back to when he first met the Unseen at the very beginning of this story. For Blink herself, when she travels through, she ends up at a kind of nexus point of realities, which is to say, every possible version of herself that can exist. And when that happens, she starts marshaling forces. And so she literally brings into this fight with all these different iterations of Kang, and even like Time Eater Kang, fighting like millions of versions of Kang. She brings in every single version of herself, and even just like all these different reality beings from across the multiverse that all attack Time Eater Kang in one fell swoop. And while it's not enough to like destroy him permanently, it is enough to basically send him into a retreat. Because what's said here is the tyrant truly dead then? And the response, dead? Unlikely. He's Kang. But gone for now? Yes. And I don't think he'll ever be able to draw on this power again. So is traditional Kang the Conqueror just out there in the multiverse somewhere just doing his thing, but we'll never see Time Eater Kang because he'll never be able to gain that level of power again. As far as the question of why, I don't know, because Marvel just decided that he never would. This is one of those things where like there aren't really any hard and fast answers to like why stuff's happening. It's just things are happening because they're happening because it's the Exiles, and stuff just happens in the Exiles comics, and like that's it. I personally enjoy it. I think it's fun, but let me know what you guys think down in the comments section. With that being said, guys, we're going to bring this to an end. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.